Elizebeth Smith Friedman was not the kind of woman history expected to find in the shadows of World War II intelligence. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't carry a weapon. She carried something far more dangerous to the enemy: the ability to break their secrets. In 1942, that skill stopped one of Adolf Hitler's most ambitious assassination plots on Allied forces and saved thousands of lives without a single shot fired. By the spring of that year, the war in Europe was raging. The Atlantic was swarming with German U-boats waiting to pick off Allied ships. The Queen Mary wasn't just another vessel. It was a massive British ocean liner converted into a troop ship that sometimes carried over 10,000 soldiers at a time. It was fast, heavily guarded, and so valuable that Hitler reportedly offered a massive reward to any submarine commander who could sink it. From her small, windowless office tucked inside a top-secret government unit, Friedman picked up traces of a threat. She had been monitoring clandestine radio messages sent between Axis spies operating in South America. Nazi intelligence agents had been building networks in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Chile, hoping to gather military movements and push these neutral nations toward the Axis cause. The codes they used weren't as complex as those used by the German High Command, but they were clever enough to avoid casual detection. They weren't clever enough to slip past Elizabeth. In March 1942, she intercepted communications revealing that German agents in Brazil had successfully identified the location of the Queen Mary and had passed that information to U-boat commanders. There were more than 8,000 soldiers on board that ship as it crossed the South Atlantic. If it were hit, the loss would have been catastrophic in both lives and morale. Because of her discovery and the warnings that followed, the ship changed course and slipped away from danger before any German submarine could reach it. Thousands survived because she caught a message that many others would have missed. Friedman had been breaking codes long before World War II. She was born in Indiana in 1892 and fell into cryptanalysis almost by accident. In 1916, she took a job at Riverbank Laboratories in Illinois, run by a wealthy businessman named George Fabian. He was obsessed with the belief that Francis Bacon had secretly authored Shakespeare's plays and that hidden messages in the text would prove it. Elizabeth's assignment was to find those hidden messages. That strange job turned into a calling. At Riverbank, she met another young codebreaker named William Friedman. They married the next year and eventually became one of the most influential cryptology couples in history. When the United States entered World War I, the government had almost no formal cryptographic capability. The Friedmans and their colleagues at Riverbank filled that gap, decoding covert communications and training early military codebreakers. By 1921, they were brought to Washington to work directly for the War Department. A few years later, Elizabeth joined the U.S. Coast Guard, which at the time fell under the Department of the Treasury. Her job was to crack the codes of rum runners and smugglers during Prohibition. She formed her own code-breaking team and became the first woman to run such a unit in the federal government. Her work helped convict dozens of high-profile bootleggers and dismantle entire smuggling operations. When World War II broke out, the Coast Guard shifted to the Navy. Women were not permitted to lead units under naval structure, so she suddenly found herself answering to male superiors who didn't always understand how skilled she was or where she could be most effective. She was assigned to focus on Axis espionage in Latin America by monitoring radio traffic, decrypting enemy messages, and tracing the movement of Nazi agents across the region. Although the codes used in South America weren't as sophisticated as the Enigma or the Japanese naval ciphers, those networks were dangerous. Nazi spies were feeding information about Allied troop movements and naval departures straight to German submarines. Every message she broke had the potential to prevent a disaster. One of the most significant spies she uncovered was Johannes Siegfried Becker, code-named Sargo. He was a key figure in Germany's efforts to build influence in Argentina and coordinate espionage operations across the continent. Through intercepted messages, Friedman tracked his plans, identified his associates, and exposed his communications routes. She was the first to determine the ship he was using to travel. Authorities intercepted him, captured him, and brought him to London. He confessed and provided information that helped bring down multiple spy rings operating across Latin America. While tracking Becker and others, she intercepted more messages that revealed planned sabotage, recruitment schemes, and attempts to undermine pro-Allied governments. Her office turned decrypted messages into actionable intelligence that was shared with the State Department, Navy intelligence, British security, and South American governments. In total, her work led to the dismantling of dozens of agents tied to networks stretching from Rio de Janeiro to Buenos Aires to Santiago. She also contributed to the case against Velvely Dickinson, a New York doll shop owner who secretly spied for Japan. Dickinson used innocent-sounding letters about collectible dolls to send coded messages about U.S. naval vessels. The FBI took credit for the prosecution, but her letters were sent to Elizebeth for decoding and interpretation. Friedman's analysis helped prosecutors prove the espionage. Even though she was doing high-stakes work, the public never saw her name. Her team's work was often attributed to the FBI, especially by Director J. Edgar Hoover, who was known to take credit for intelligence breakthroughs he didn't control. Elizebeth remained silent about it until the day she died in 1980. She had been bound by secrecy her entire career and followed those rules even when fame and acknowledgement were denied to her. Her husband William received more recognition partly because he had to testify in investigations surrounding the attack on Pearl Harbor. But historians eventually began piecing together Elizebeth's contributions. Archival documents and declassified files showed that her efforts helped neutralize enemy intelligence efforts in the Western Hemisphere and saved thousands of lives, including the troops aboard the Queen Mary. She was one of the earliest American cryptanalysts, a pioneer who entered the field before it even had an official name. She founded code-breaking units, trained generations of cryptologists, and used her intellect to outmaneuver spies across oceans. Her story stayed hidden for decades because the missions were secret and the credit was misplaced. Only after her death did researchers reveal how essential she was to winning the intelligence war in the Western Atlantic and Latin America. Elizebeth Smith Friedman never stepped onto a battlefield, but she fought one of the most invisible and consequential battles of the Second World War. She did it with pencil, paper, memory, and logic. Her victories were quiet, but they changed the course of events. The lives saved on the Queen Mary were just one example of how powerful her work really was. Her legacy is the proof that some of the most decisive blows in wartime history were dealt in silence by minds that refused to let the enemy speak freely.